Is that all right to talk about?
I think so. I don't know.
Okay, cool. Welcome to the podcast. All right, going back to our conversation. We're going live here, talking about things ministry and then recapping the sermon from Sunday to help our people. Growth track stuff.
Yeah.
Simplifying to help people take their next step.
I was going to ask if that, I'm just picking up where we left off.
Yeah.
Is that something that could go after? So after growth track, we say, hey, you're going to get an email with all of the extra info. So growth track sets the stage, give the vision, why groups, why serve, why join. And then at the end, the next day or later that night or whatever, they get an email. It's like, here's a breakdown of our groups. Here's what it looks like. Here's a breakdown of all the areas of service. Here's what that looks like. And here's the membership covenant. Here's what you're committing to. Take whatever next step, you feel like you need to take.
So instead of printing out documents, you're saying just make it like email PDFs?
I just don't think anyone, well, I don't know. It could go either way, but nobody's taking those pamphlets yet in Jesus or Pizza with the Pastors.
Pizza with the Pastors, they
take them?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Nobody took the Baptist Faith and Message ones.
Well, that kind of makes sense.
I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't
it could
know.
be both.
To me, it's like
an easy
supplemental.
thing to
It's
send.
like what do people like? Are they visual? Do they want a video? Great, we can send you a video version.
Yeah.
Do they like to read and hold in their hand? Great, we have that version. Like, what if there's just these are all saying the same thing?
I don't trust people to tell us what they want.
They don't know what they want.
Right.
So okay.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
if I say, hey, let me know how you want this information at the end, I can send this to you, whatever. Nobody's going to come up and be like, hey, I'd like an email or a video or a pamphlet or whatever. Do you get what I'm saying?
I know. So my thought was you give it all. So like when they get there, they have a pamphlet. Then they get an email saying,
yeah.
here's a video version.
I thought you were saying pamphlet over email.
No, I'm saying both.
Everything. Yeah, totally.
So
yeah.
then they'll kind of naturally, maybe they don't know, but they'll be like, oh yeah, video sounds good to me. And then they'll watch the video.
There's a ton of ways for them. We give them every option available.
And we just kind of make it clear, just like pick your, like you don't have to read the pamphlet and watch the video.
Right.
I don't know. Is that too complicated?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what's on the pamphlet. But
So every second Sunday of the month, we do Growth Track. It helps people take their next step in groups, serving, and joining. And so we're trying to figure out, yesterday, we never stop learning.
Boom.
At our church. So we're not changing things dramatically, but we're always asking the question, how do we make that easier, more efficient? How do we make it clearer? And so, okay. So making videos can make, and getting through the details on the videos might be helpful for some. Creating Word docs or full on printout stapled things.
I just think that if our goal in Growth Track is to streamline,
Yes.
going from sitting to serving, right?
Yeah.
Tender to being fully integrated in our community. We've eliminated tons of barriers so far, but there's still some barriers.
Yes.
And right now it has less to do with the actual barriers and more to do with how people process the next steps.
Well,
so
and
it's easy for them to take those next steps, but it's like telling them what that means and what that entails and what that looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of that Jesus strategy where he's like, just follow me. Like we're kind of, at what point is it you're giving too much information? Like we just want you to like get in and you're going to learn a lot more as you go.
Yeah.
Like, are we trying to cover way too much in one sitting?
I bet you that's why they just do serve as the second one, which again to me is weird because I get the idea that you serve before you join or whatever, but
I also think it expresses priorities. I think we have a higher priority emphasis on groups than a lot of churches do.
Yeah, definitely.
Than the churches that we've been learning from.
Right.
Not acting like a lot of churches emphasize groups, but I think the people we've been learning from, which is great, they probably just don't have that as a value.
But I think that's where they see the return. So their whole.
But okay, we're not going to mention who we're talking about because that will help, right? But is that because they're more Sunday centric than we are?
Well, sure, but if their goal is to integrate people into the Sunday gathering so that they can then funnel them into the other areas of ministry. The Sunday gathering is the entry point. So how do you get more people to stay in that entry point to where they can then take the next step of...
Because they use that language like they need to join a tribe and like a serving team.
Yeah, exactly.
Is the tribe that they first feel connected.
And they're huge, so that helps too.
Yeah.
If you want to get to know people in a huge church, I would say serving is better than groups. Purely for the purpose of getting to know people. Shoulder to shoulder stuff.
Shoulder to shoulder.
And
that's true.
less
that's
intimidating.
True. And you feel like you're contributing.
Mm-hmm. And people train you, and there's a tactile like response to what you're doing.
But we're getting better with the, and I think we're in the middle of that.
Yeah.
With Emily helping us with some serving docs and stuff. Like, that'll really help us next month.
Yeah. Sorry, I should know this. What is this?
I almost want to mute you right now.
What live are we on? Is this your channel?
Yeah, that's why we're kind of like talking about normal stuff, and then we're gonna clip out the.
Cool. Okay.
Also, I had some feedback, and I think it's helpful.
Good.
You ready?
Yeah.
You need to ask me questions too.
Okay.
Someone's like, it looked like you were just hosting him. I'm like, well, we're just kind of winging it.
Well, yeah, that's what I thought.
I just kidding. I just came up with more questions last time, so
okay.
Feel free to ask me questions. I feel like I have nothing to bring, so you're like anything I would ask, I already know the answer to. So
you tell me the answer.
How exhausted are you? Are you still exhausted from the weekend?
No, I feel good.
People were logging off because they're like, "What conversation did we just get in the middle of?"
Yeah.
I was a bit tired Sunday morning.
Yeah, I mean it is what it is. I think if you look at like the hours, I always have to remind myself this. It's like an 8 to 4 job. You're just kind of doing one thing.
It was to 5.
8 to 5, yeah, with a 1 hour lunch break.
Yeah, so. I guess it was on a Saturday though, so then like you kind of already have.
It's because the expectations are off.
Yeah, but it's so academically loaded. It's just a little different.
Yeah.
But I wasn't as tired as you because I didn't drive.
It's fine.
I realized I went for a walk right after, a prayer walk, because I just needed it. And then I went to Walgreens, got a drink, ran into this super sketchy person who was on something. And like, I thought I had to defend this girl. She had a WWJD bracelet on, but he was like, I thought they were together. And then like, she gave me a look like, I don't know who this guy is. So then I was like, oh, so I was here trying to like figure out how to get in between them. And help this girl. I didn't have any Jesus stuff on, but she knew, it's a light of the world stuff. That all worked out fine. He had like the Joker laugh. So it's like, I don't know if he was on something or like he just has some sort of, yeah. And so she was terrified. Anyways, did all that, walked home because wait,
what did you do? Did you step in? Did you protect her?
Nothing ever came to fruition, but I was kind of like, I got you, and I think that made her feel good. She hurried up and bought her stuff because it was all in the line. He was next, and so she just booked it. And so then she was fine. But I was thinking, like, what do I do? How do I step in? She was very, obviously, like any girl is uncomfortable being alone in a store, and then a guy like is like very close. So, anyways. Then I walked home, and then I did a couple other things, and then I realized Caleb's still not home. Like I've done so much.
You know what though? It's like I said, I gave you my reasoning. First of all, it's super awkward taking that class on Zoom because everyone.
We're in a seminary class together. Go ahead.
And professor's just staring at you the whole time, which I didn't know he was going to do.
Yeah.
Second thing though is it's harder for me to focus for a 10-hour class if I'm on Zoom in my house, like the embodied.
I actually was very focused.
Were you? The fact that I'm in the classroom physically makes me feel better. Plus, the drive home is really decompressing. It's nice. I don't fully feel rested by the time I get home because it's still an hour drive, but it's nice to just not have anything to focus on. But whatever.
Well, it was also weird because I still had to stay in this room because they had my wife had an event last night with a bunch of ladies. So
did you go out and say hi?
Yeah.
Okay.
With like just like weird guy in his lair.
Yeah.
No, I had to take a photo, so that was one of the things. And put the kids to bed. So, okay, let's because we have to go places today.
Yeah,
we're finding the Monday podcast. We're trying to make this routine, but also I'm kind of like I wish we had a better schedule because Mondays we just need to like mind dump with each other how yesterday went, what's going. But let's do this. We are in part 2 of our Formed by Hospitality series. We are talking about feasting with the saints. I'll read the recap because I don't know if you have it in front of you.
Oh, I don't.
Okay.
I didn't read it last week.
It used to be you. We used to do that. All right, this is the long recap, but that's okay, right? Feasting with the Saints, part 2. When the people of God are described throughout the Bible, they're most often described as a family. And when family gathers for dinner, they share more than just a meal. They share their life, stories, laughter, questions, tragedies, and celebrations. Throughout the scriptures, the people of God use meals to mark this kind of fellowship. The art of eating together with those we're close to is a lost one. Meals have been commodified and looked over as nothing more than a relieving break from the mundanity of work at best. Did I say that wrong?
No, that's good.
This is all Caleb's
I just
words.
hate how I write.
Or an inconvenient break in our daily rhythms at worst. We might enjoy an occasional date night, birthday celebration, or holiday feast, but the regular practice of sharing life at a table is one that fewer and fewer people in the West are participating in. For Christians to recapture this lost tradition, we must intentionally make space in our schedules to be hospitable towards those in our community. Feasting regularly with other followers of the way encourages us, strengthens our bonds, and nourishes our souls. Then the little part I added, but there's also a shadow side to community. Without love, grace, and intentionality, we can fall into the trap of this one's a hard word. Do you agree? Familiarity, codependency, resentment, and idealism.
Boom.
What say you?
Sounds good.
Yeah, you're not a very good host.
I know I'm not a good host. I'm not the one with the podcast.
Okay, I'll say this. First of all, I think our church is doing really well with this.
Yeah.
This might be the best practice our church has done so far, at least the first half.
Yeah.
I think the last half is going to be very challenging, and I don't know how challenging our people know.
Yeah.
Because the first two, this was a great strategy.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about how do you, because it's feasting with the Savior, with the saints, with strangers, with sinners.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized do it in that order because you get some wins under, what's that phrase? Wins under your belt? Under your belt. And then, oh my gosh, this is kind of hard. But it's great to have little W's, upstream versus downstream. It's good to have some downstream in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's been fun, man. I'm actually shocked how many ping pong balls, it's not going to take all year.
Right. That's the hope. Yeah.
I'm thinking it's going to get done in like 3 months.
Actually, that's true. You're right. Well, I have a theory, and it's a really cynical theory. So I'll save it for when we turn the cameras off.
I was about to say, are you going to share it?
I can if you want me to.
Yeah, go for it.
I think that what's happening now is people are getting familiar with others in our community for the first time, at a deeper level. So there's a surge, but to continue getting,
they're going to hit the shadow side.
They're going to hit the shadow side, and so they're going to stop getting meals, sharing meals, hosting each other within our church. So what are the other two practices? The stranger and the sinner. Those are a lot harder. So it's going to slow down a little bit, and then it's going to stretch to the end of the year. Because we're not going to see people feasting. Maybe prove me wrong. We're not going to see people feasting with strangers and sinners at the rate that they're, hosting each other right now.
I almost wonder if that should be the expectation too, though, right?
Yes, yeah. I don't
for me too.
Yeah. Don't invite. And we gave a lot of clarifications in my group on Wednesday. Don't invite the neighbor you've never talked to into your home for a meal. You know what I mean? There's wisdom and discernment here. We're not telling you to
oh, it's almost like, hey, get in the van. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, don't do that. Also, we have, some single women in our group who are I'm not inviting my neighbor into my home and it's that's not what we're saying. There's discernment, wisdom, be smart about it, things like that. Which is why I think it's really helpful that it's all, like you said, upstream, downstream, really easy, simple next steps for people. But yeah, that's my cynical theory.
Thanks for joining us, Joshua Quest from San Antonio, Texas.
Nice.
I'm sorry. Don't like the Spurs. Go Suns. Other than that, shout out to you, brother. Okay, that makes sense. I don't know if that's cynical as is realistic, which we're going to talk about the sin of idealism in some sorts, the shadow side of idealism. I think it's really wise to get some reps in. If you've never hosted anyone before, let's start with our church family, those who know we're trying this practice, those who understand, hey, you're not here to entertain me. This is hosting. Mm-hmm. We have found a lot of joy in the last month or so to host people from our church, and a little more than normal. And it's been fun. I also love, I think it was from your booklet you put together, just that idea of don't have a ton of expectations. Just set the table. And, it's hard. I know it's hard for you and me as pastors to think how do I pastor this moment? How do I control this environment? How do I lead into better conversations? And I think there's a time and place for that. And of course, there was moments where I've done that within it. But it's also been nice to be no, let's just feast together. I'm getting better at embracing silence when you're eating.
Yeah.
That used to be something. I know that's not a problem for you. But for me, it's funny story. Or, I get a little nervous. Oh, my gosh, we've gone a little while and nobody's talked.
Yeah. Yeah, there's I think the tip I give in the book is serve, don't entertain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the usual knee-jerk reaction people have whenever you have someone in your home or anytime that you are instigating time together with another person, you feel responsible for that time. And so all the insecurities come up, I think. Like, I have to make them like me. I have to make sure they're happy, that they're enjoying this or whatever. And it's really easy to kind of slip into entertaining mode. And then if you're really good at hosting, you have a really nice home or whatever, that just becomes easier than actually serving. So you rely on entertaining your guests with fun games and questions, and which are all great. Those are all really good tactics.
But it almost becomes more of a show off of like, look at me, look at this skill I have, rather than like, how can I serve you in this moment?
I was trying to find a way when you sent me your notes to have you use the dinner party episode of The Office as like an illustration, but I didn't know if that would land. Because it's like such a good example of like the absolute, which wildly, well, probably maybe not that unrealistic from maybe some dinner parties we've been to, but
seriously,
just like a really good example of what not to do. They do like everything wrong, and it's all about entertaining. So they're trying to prove it's almost like they're trying to prove that they're like a normal couple.
But
Michael
then they start
and Jan.
fighting and talk.
Yes,
back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah, snip, snap, snip, snap. Yeah. But
instead,
it's like
I use Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah,
as
good
an
call.
example.
Well, that was the idealism one, right?
Yeah.
So,
Let's get into those things.
Yeah.
So there's a shadow side, meaning you can do this thing and out of nowhere, we believe that our community is facing spiritual warfare. There's an enemy who prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And so we kind of made that line that the enemy. Let me make sure I have my notes. When the enemy wants to divide a church, he starts at the top, meaning at leadership levels and at the table. And so when you begin to actually do community, he's going to do all he can to thwart our endeavors. And so we talked about step one in making friends is proximity. Just get around people. The problem is eventually when you're around people enough, the shadow side of proximity is familiarity. You become over familiar with people. You don't honor them for who they are.
you get bored. I think that's a huge part of this one element of the shadow side is just the familiarity and the boredom.
It's almost like why people love first dates, because there's just so much excitement or maybe second dates. I don't know who loves first dates.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you start dating somebody long enough, it's like, well, what are we going to talk about? I remember when we were on our 10-year anniversary, we were on a trip and we were just hanging out in the jacuzzi it was a huge one. So a bunch of people were there and we spend our time eavesdropping on what everybody else was saying.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh my gosh, how terrible are we? Jordan's like, well, we've kind of talked about everything. Like, it's the end of the day. We're good. We're having fun here. Like, it was very fun. But like, because we were looking at couples and they just couldn't stop talking to each other. It's like, oh, this is their honeymoon, or this is, so it's like, well, we're just different stages.
Shelby and I play this. Well, we do it sometimes. If we're at dinner and we see other couples, we try and guess. Not like we'll ever know, but we try and guess how long they've been together based on body language and if we can hear their conversations, things like that.
We were thrown off a couple weeks ago. We were doing that. We're like, either they've been married for 50 years or they're brother and sister. And we could not figure it out. There's just weird vibes. But what threw us off was like, oh, you're going to pay for lunch? I'll pay for dinner. We were like, wait, what? Like they were like so kind, but then it was that's what made me go, maybe they're just brothers and sisters and one's in town. It was weird, man.
That's interesting. Yeah, Shelby and I have done that because it's like, oh, we like whose card are we using, or like which bank account, or which
funny.
So that I don't know, that unimportant, but yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about the ethics of that later.
Yeah.
Okay, no, familiarity. So like it takes 50 hours to go from an acquaintance to a casual friend, 90 hours to go from casual to friend, and then 200 to qualify as a best friend, which I don't think there's a ton of wisdom in labeling people as best friends, because I think it actually gives a lot of pressure. It makes them like, you need to be all these things to me, which we'll talk about later in a next one of the other shadow sides. But I really do think we don't talk enough about familiarity. I think we need to combat that with honor. We saw in Romans 12:10, outdo one another in showing honor. If there's going to be any competition, it's honoring each other. And I think a lot of pastors feel that, but I think a lot of so like there's two sides to that coin. I think some pastors are like, man, I wish I was honored more. Sure, but like, how often are you honoring your people? You know, like that line, like, oh, ministry would be great if it weren't for the people. Like, that's not honoring to your congregation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think again, I think back of my life and even the people who have come and left our church, and some have left for really good reasons, and some I think it's really common for people to leave just because of the familiarity. They get bored.
True.
And so the boredom like pushes you to find the new experience. You want to find people that are interesting, but then those interesting people become boring too. And it's like this cycle of being interested by people, everything's new, and then you get familiar. There's nothing left. The magic's gone, whatever. So you jump to a new community, and then, or even like within groups, small groups, people jump around because the people that they're with aren't as interesting. And then even something like moving. We were talking about this, where like if you move like churches entirely or cities or whatever, then you realize how great that community was because the familiarity was actually a source of comfort.
Yeah.
You didn't realize. But then that passes and it fades and you start to identify more with your new place, and it kind of starts over if you're not careful.
I don't know if it's backed by data, but I'll never forget this tweet that talked about how most church members, like why they leave every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And it was that they get familiar, but also they get known, and they don't like that. So I need to go somewhere else where my shadow side isn't being revealed and my different quirks and things that people don't like about me, instead of dealing with it or repenting or just saying, hey, whatever hard conversation that entails, we just kind of move on. Familiarity is a huge device of the enemy, I would say. And that's the shadow. And I talked one line, we said the shadow side of familial love is it becomes familiar love. Like I think of all the relationships I take for granted in my life, probably some of the highest ones are my sisters. They're my sisters. We've done a lot of life together, but like, I don't know. We're not like overly honoring of each other. We just kind of like, oh, we exist. Hi, good to see you. Like, how's the kids? Kind of move on. So I was kind of even convicted of that and thinking through it. Last thing I'll say on that, because we need to get rolling because we have places to go, is you have to schedule honor. Like, you have to assign it. Like, I think you have to be super intentional or else it's not going to happen. The shadow side of vulnerability is codependency. I'm still hosting this, by the way.
Do you want me to go through it?
Yeah. Go ahead and explain it.
Well, you talked about, the whole vulnerability thing. We come up against that in proximity. At certain points in proximity, you start to reveal who you really are, and that either happens by choice or by accident. But that process of being vulnerable can be really helpful, or it can become, you called it, you compared it to a weapon. And so that issue of codependency to where
a tool to use or a weapon to control,
Yeah.
a tool to connect or a weapon to control.
Right. And so vulnerability can become a way to manipulate people. I like how you talked about it happens primarily out of fear, that there's a fear that people will take advantage of it. People will leave you for it, things like that. And so you become really codependent on others through your vulnerability. Yeah.
It does get scary if I've opened up to you. Now I'm like, what are you going to do with that? And so now we need to be with each other all the time, or else I can't see if you, do you feel like isn't codependency a really hard thing to be self-aware of?
Well, not in hindsight, but yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there's a little bit of like fear. I think there's a healthy fear in vulnerability. Yeah. How do you know? You gave a thing that was, how do you know you're in a codependent relationship?
Yeah, the Jenny Allen quote. Okay, I'll read it. How do you know if you're in a codependent relationship? One sign is that you constantly feel discouraged and disappointed by the person. I love that even just right there. When you have an extreme reaction to something, you need to pay attention because it's probably evidence of something or someone you've made into an idol. This happens a lot to pastors. Like when people say, man, they won't say it out loud, but like, man, you're disappointing me. And sometimes it's like, yeah, that's on me. What I did was wrong. I didn't, or it's like, no, you put unfair expectation. You have to realize you're not the only person I'm shepherding. So I only have 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week. And so there's times where it will feel like maybe I'm quote unquote ignoring you. I'm not, but you also don't know the thing blowing up over here that I can't ever tell you because that would be not wise or loving of this other person in this other scenario we're counseling with. So I just don't have time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The codependency thing is tough too within the context of a church specifically, because people don't, I forget who said, I think it was Tyler Staton in another podcast say that one of the hardest things about pastoring is that everybody has a different expectation of what you should be to them, but you don't know what it is, and oftentimes neither do they. And I think people bring that also to each other, that they expect if you come into a church with a lot of needs and you're aware of those needs and you start dumping those on people or sharing or whatever, you're struggling with, the expectation is because this is different from like your yoga class or whatever, like there's a spiritual element to it. These people are meant to build me up and pour into me and receive, my struggles as well, weep with me. And the minute they turn their focus to someone else or they don't meet the needs, whatever, you feel like you're hurt. You feel like you've been shunned. You feel like the church isn't doing its job.
Or if you're giving them tough love, because sometimes that is what they need. Like, hey, I'm actually perpetuating your victimhood mentality. If I just keep, like, sometimes I'm not going to weep with you this time. I'm going to give you, no, here's what you need to do. Or this was actually your fault.
Yeah.
And that's hard for some people to receive.
Yeah.
So we kind of said to combat that by expanding your inner circle. Romans 12:4-8 talks about the many different members and the many different gifts. And so much of that codependency is not remembering, hey, this person is just a finger in the body of Christ. You need other parts of the body to serve and to be served. I was also fearful of kind of the way we positioned this point. It's all about serving others. You're not going to find any freedom if it's like, well, if they're not serving me in all the best ways, I need to find more people to serve me. I think when you do that, of course, you'll wind up being served and being cared for if you're also doing serving and caring for others.
Yeah. And it's also the Philippians 2 thing, right? Consider everyone else more important than yourself, essentially.
And Romans 12 says the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah. Really hard to do when you're carrying a specific struggle or a specific point of suffering or something. And so I think that's where the tension is sharing that, being vulnerable, but also still at the same time considering other people as important, if not more important than yourself, turning your attention outward and participating in the body together.
Which requires the grace of Jesus, because it's not natural within us just to count others more significant than ourselves. And I think that's a good reminder. We're gospel people. We're asking for the power of God to give us this ability. We're mentioning these things because this is what will naturally happen in community. And that's maybe a sign like, good, you're leaning in. This is better than isolation, not experiencing any of these things. But we can combat these things, know what they are, and pray against it and do certain practices and conversations, fight that codependency, fight that familiarity, but also fighting resentment. So the next shadow side of practice. So we're talking about practicing in community. We begin to do these things together. You really develop resentment. I think I've found this as a pastor, right? Like this last year, becoming so practice-based. I don't think I've dwelled on it, but there's been temptations to resent, like, man, I'm here Sabbathing every week, and this person who is a XYZ leader or whatever isn't. It becomes less about what you're doing and more about what they're not doing, and that's really missing the point. We lead by example, we lead by imitation. We can't force anybody to do these things, but I think we can get excited, like, oh, I'm actually trying this thing, or I'm actually being generous, and homeboy over here has, So I think there's so many easy examples, not just for pastors, just for everyday Christians, to begin to resent others because you're trying so hard, and when it looks like they're not, you begin to develop a self-righteous spirit, and that automatically generates a resenting spirit, and that's like the quickest way to divide a family of believers.
Yeah. Do you think it also happens though because when we talked about practice in the last series, the vision series, it was a lot about practice together, but also practice to like commit to each other. So do you feel like it happens that way as well? Like,
like accountability kind of.
Yeah. Like I'm the one making sure that our group is still meeting. I'm doing the work. I'm committing to you. You're not committing to me.
There's some legitimate, genuine frustration there. That's like, it is on that other person to also, hey, if we covenanted together, we committed together, you do need to do it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
That's true.
So how do you balance that between...
There's never an excuse to be resenting, though.
Yeah. At what point does it become resentment?
Maybe when you don't rebuke. Do you begin to resent? It's like, no, have the hard conversation rather than have it all in your mind and just assume what they're going to say. So resentment happens when we haven't had that conversation.
Yeah.
You're just assuming, why aren't you doing this? Rather than saying, hey, you committed to this. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. The confrontation's hard. And I think that's what makes this part so challenging is when there's something tangible that you can measure, we're going to do this together, and you're not doing this. You have to call somebody out on something really specific, and it's confronting. And this happens within the context of like jobs. This happens within the context of group community. Like we're doing this practice together. Even one-on-one friendships. I'm the one who's always calling you. You said you're going to call me. But then having the wisdom and the maturity, the emotional maturity, which we'll cover in a later practice this year, to call somebody out without making it personal, and to share your hurt also without making it too personal, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that fine line between, because in a sense, that's what the community is meant to do, is build each other up by way of encouragement, but also by, telling the truth in love.
Yes.
To each other. Was it 1 Timothy with all gentleness, or 2 Timothy, something like that? Yeah.
I'm really proud of our community because I think we have legitimate examples. Of course, we can't share out loud, but we're doing that thing.
Let's do it.
Don't give examples. No, you know what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah.
what gives me confidence to talk about this and preach about it. We've been doing it in our leadership, and our leaders have been doing it in their leadership, and that's really great. But that's why I think Romans 12:12 is so encouraging. Be patient in affliction. And who was it? John Stott was the one arguing.
I was going to ask, yeah.
3-16 is community. It's the church. These are all staccatos for the church. 17, he argues, is now a shift to the outside world. What were you going to ask?
I was going to ask, where you got that from. Because in patient and affliction, I think most of us would read that and say, well, he's writing to a persecuted church. They're experiencing affliction from the outside in. So the patience and affliction means like just stick together, huddle tight, bear it together. But your point was, no, he's talking about affliction within the community, not from the outside in, but from the inside in when they hurt each other. That's affliction.
Because when you look at the preceding verses and the ones after, it is all about bearing with one another,
Internal.
dealing with one another. It is a lot of internal. Now, of course, we're supposed to be patient in outside affliction. But I think the point really drives home when you realize it's also the context of inside. And I would argue the biggest afflictions I've gone through in my life are those within the congregation, within my family, because those expectations are much higher. Therefore, it hurts even more when they fail you. When the outside world calls me what they call, or deserts me, it's like, yeah, I kind of expected that. We're not following the same Messiah. So I think most people's deep hurt is from within the family, which that's why we need to persist. Eugene paraphrases it: "Don't quit in the hard times and pray all the harder."
Yeah, that's good.
Last shadow side is so the steps of friendship are proximity, then vulnerability, then practice, then mission. Just like, really living it out together. But the shadow side of mission and community is idealism. I have fallen for this a lot. Idealism, you have to paint a vivid vision to get people going on mission. And so in and of itself, it is idealistic, but because of the grace of Jesus and the power of Jesus, it will become realistic. But like, our plan is to reach all people and all, every tongue, tribe, nation. That's idealistic, although we know it's going to come to fruition. What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this I think is the one. This and the familiarity seem to be the two that sabotage the most, I think, because it is. And again, people tend to do this with churches, and people tend to do this with the early church too. Like, everybody wants the Acts 2 church.
Yeah.
Because it's an ideal.
Right.
And it was right after.
And it's good to know it happened in the beginning, right?
Yeah,
Like, they were
exactly.
still like in just proximity mode.
Yeah. There's a lot of like just momentum that happens when you first join a community that's taken off. And I feel like we saw this even in the life of our church a year ago.
Yeah.
We were starting these practices together, like narrowing and focusing our church on one specific task, which was to form people into the image of Jesus through very specific practices. People were on board and there was a lot of excitement. And they were chasing the ideal. But then by the time we got to the end of the year, there wasn't burnout so much as there was just like a realization that the ideal is still possible and attainable, but it's going to take work.
Like, oh, this is the narrow way.
Yeah, exactly. This actually, Jesus meant what he said when he called it a narrow way. It's difficult, and carrying your cross, the cross isn't light, that Jesus asked us to carry, but the ideal is there. And so, yeah, I think it's the same thing as, the expectations people bring with vulnerability. The ideal is we want the tight-knit community with people who are just like us, are interested in our things, and are at or above our maturity level.
Yeah.
And when I think you expect this to be the case. If you're doing all the right things, then it should look this way.
I love Tim Chester's book. First of all, Meal with Jesus is very good. It's on our recommended reads at formedbyjesus.com/hospitality. He has a wonderful quote. This is in lieu of, Dietrich Bonhoeffer really made this famous in his book Together about idealism. But I love how Tim Chester put it, because he especially put it about around a table, which is our emphasis in the series. Many people love the idea of the church as a community. But when we eat together, we encounter not some theoretical community, but real people with all their problems and quirks. We'll just leave it there. You can go listen to the whole quote in the sermon. Real people with all their problems and quirks. That's why I love we're practice based and focus on one thing, because it goes from theory to reality.
Mm-hmm. So I do have a question how you would answer this. What if somebody's listening to all this and they're thinking, I have experienced the shadow side of all this community. When I think of fellowship and community within the context of church, though, like why can't this happen over like accountability groups, one-on-one over coffee? Why are we emphasizing? Because the practice we gave for our church was find a way if you're able to have somebody over for dinner. So why that specific? Why around a table and why a meal? Why can't this happen within a small group or within a, which I guess for our model it can, but how is hospitality an answer to this or a way to combat the shadow side? What would your answer be? Like someone saying, can't I just take this person out to coffee and just push through the hard times and we just do that once a day or once a week? I mean, why are we emphasizing the table, meal fellowship, table community?
Well, I think maybe our first answer would be, well, we imitate the life and lifestyle of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so his primary methodology, it seemed in the Gospels, is to have it over a dinner table. So that's step one.
It's because coffee wasn't invented yet, though.
Oh, okay. I also think there's actual like data to show there's something quote unquote magical about food, that it does open people up. I remember when I was in high school, our youth group transitioned from just getting together into straight Bible study at 6:30 to feasting, like from 6:30 to 7:15. It was a huge meal. And it was great. We had a volunteer give legit food, and we kept growing and growing, and she just kept making it work. And so I know for me personally, I saw the power of food in just my own life. I also think with food, you can't leave quickly. There's something about like coffee. All right, I'm going to down it real quick. I got to go. Meal, there should be an expectation. Although there's another thing, a data I read about how fast we eat meals today, which is dramatically different than we used to eat back then. I do see like culturally, I think it's a vulnerable thing, like especially having meals over at your house. You're going to go have coffee at Starbucks.
Right.
Which one book I read says that Starbucks, the reason they're so great or big is they commodified hospitality. So they churned it into, hey, you don't have to host at your home. You don't have to go through all that effort. Just come. It's going to feel like home here. What would be your answers?
All of those. Yeah, I think, the first thing, like you said, it's largely cultural. So,
like, sorry, I'm cutting you off right away, but like, we're going to talk a lot, especially the next 2 weeks, about the dinner table being a boundary marker. I don't think we all know that explicitly in our culture today, but implicitly we're like, oh, I'm not going to have them at my house. I still think we operate that way. It's just not as like written down in our culture. You're only in if you've had food at our dinner table. But I think we reserve it for very few people. It is something super intimate, and it's a way we think we're affirming or not affirming certain people.
Yeah, I think one fear people have is the table exposes you. So again, the knee-jerk reaction is to entertain and do things in a way that you normally wouldn't. And so when you have people over, they're exposed to not just what you serve, but how you eat, what you talk about, your body language, like all of that, which is you normally do that with your guard down. Now you're inviting people into that space, and that's really scary, and it can be. But also I think that culturally, the meal was the way that you designated who was in and who was out. And your way of showing hospitality they didn't have a Starbucks. They didn't have another option.
True.
The meal was built into their communal rhythm already. And so for us, the meal is, again, an outlet to that end, to creating space where you can't leave right away, where you can actually be served, where you can intentionally honor, and where your attention is also, you have the ability to focus on something else, which is the food. You're enjoying something together. So if there was another way to do that, then
all of those things,
then that would be the practice. Again, the practice
That's
isn't
a good point.
just eating the food.
It's always a means to an end, right?
Yeah, the means, the meal is the means. And the end goal is confronting all of the shadow side that we're talking about.
Well, I've had people ask, and I know you have said, because people have said, well, and I think there's two different conversations. Because somebody said, hey, if I just have people over at my house, we don't eat. Isn't that hospitality? And so they're like, therefore, can I put a ping pong ball in? And I need to go back to this person and tell this person, well, to be specific to our display, it says meals. So for that, do, ping pong balls are only for meals. But I do think it would be considered hospitable. Like even Ron and Janet's powerful story.
Sure.
It was over food, but they weren't the one making it. But they were the one hosting because they were saying, hey, let me pray for you. Hey, I'm going to check in on you. Hey, I'm going to take care of your family. So you were arguing too that hospitality is not just you bringing people over for a meal. You can be hospitable in a million different ways, right?
Yeah, I think hospitality.
Well, I also don't want it to be a cop-out, right?
No, totally. And so hospitality is, again, if it's a means to an end, then we can't specify it. We can't get super specific with what it is exactly. I think the end goal should everyone's goal in our church, I would love for the ultimate aim to be having people over to your house for a meal because of what that does to that relationship, not because of the meal itself. But I also recognize that people are on a journey and people have different, personality types and things like that, concerns, issues, personal life matters that might prevent them from doing that. So I still think you can be hospitable to others by taking these steps, which is why we gave the practices going from very easy to very hard.
I'll share those.
Yeah.
Yeah, very easy to very hard. And I had a great conversation with Emily yesterday because she was looking ahead because she read the booklet. Well, she edited the booklet for us. And she said it was funny because she's like, some of the very hard was very easy for me. And I was like, me and you went back and forth on that.
Yes.
Because it's all about personality. It's all about what kind of home you have. Like there's so many different variables. If you're extroverted, meeting strangers is fun. If you're introverted, that's a nightmare. So we do say very easy to very hard is pretty relative. We think generally this goes from easy to hard. Very easy would become to come early and stay late to church to have intentional conversations. It's amazing how that little 15-minute shift in your schedule can really integrate you into community. Spencer and Emily were saying, she said that part's very hard for her. I was like, really? I was like, you show up so early. She goes, yeah, but that part where we're not serving, like we're just waiting and then talking, that's extremely hard. I was like, I didn't think about that. And so I was saying it's probably easier for people when you serve because now you have something to talk about. You're doing something together. But imagine it's very challenging for those who don't have any sort of Sunday morning service opportunity, which you can at the Growth Track every second Sunday of the month. I imagine that is a little bit more of a difficult ask. What do I talk about for those 15 minutes? What do I talk about for those 2 minutes during Pass the Peace?
Yeah.
There is a lot of anxiety that comes from that. But we still consider that kind of easy compared to all the other practices.
Yeah.
Okay. 2, easy. Find someone sitting alone, sit by them, and go out to lunch after. Did you feel this? Did you know I was going to mention these out loud in the message?
Yeah, they were in your notes.
Okay. I felt bad because I thought the person sitting alone right now is going to everyone's going to look at them. So I was trying to go through that quickly. I do want that to be a principle, but it's always hard to talk about because there were people sitting alone. And that's why I kind of was like, hey, there's college students in this room. There's people who they're single. There's, I was trying to hey, that's just normal.
Broaden it. Yeah.
Yeah. So find someone sitting alone, sit by them, go out to lunch after. I don't know if anybody did that.
Who knows? Maybe next week.
Maybe. We'll hear the story. Yeah. If you did that, let us know. How great would that be?
If somebody got taken out to lunch, don't be insulted. That's a really kind, honoring thing. So
yeah, see? Yeah. Hey, you alone person.
Yeah, that was not the spirit of this idea.
Yeah. And that's why I also said there's so many where their spouse is working on this day and there's a lot of different situations. Or sometimes people are just alone.
Or even a family that's alone. Like some families sit together. Some families just sit alone. So
all right. We still mean it, but it can be, moderate. Invite people to your home for dinner.
Yeah. I could see how that would be easier than coming 15 minutes early. I think in my mind it was harder because you have to do more, to work. You have to actually think about a meal.
Change your whole schedule.
Schedule something. So it requires more, but the actual practice of doing that might be easier.
A hard would be to invite people over that are in a different stage of life, might be in need, or just someone you've never spoken to before. I like how you gave many different, so it could be like, hey, you in need? I'm doing the hard practice this week.
Right.
That's great. I think that's huge. So many of just people find it so hard. I don't know why. My mind doesn't work this way, but maybe because being pastors, you can't work this way. But so many people view people in different stages of life. And, if you're not my age and my same situation, there's no way we're going to be friends. I've never understood that sentiment, but that is certainly a pervasive sentiment. That's very normal for most people.
I think that's a struggle for me. I feel weird sometimes trying to Even people, some people in our own church are like, I put a limit on how much we're going to be able to relate to each other, and it's an assumption that I make that I've had to work through over the years. But that started when when I joined staff, I was single, unmarried, 23 years old.
I wish I had the photo to show right now.
Yeah. And it was hard for me to go out to lunch with people as a pastor and relate to them as a pastor, but also as a person. There was a lot of weird. I was trying to see who I was to them and who I should be. It was a lot of weird. So I imagine some people feel that way too. But
I imagine it's a lot harder if I would take off my pastor hat to go to someone who's 85 and say, "Can we go to lunch and just hang out?"
Yeah.
It's also maybe in that context too. I'm already thinking, "Hey, can you mentor me?" That's probably like the. Yeah. But sometimes no, it's just like, can we just be friends? But I don't know.
Yeah, that's actually one of the tips I give in the book in the little booklet is if you are in the later half of your life, second half of your life, or younger half, or you're single or unmarried or whatever, consider reaching out to those in a different stage and say, hey, I want to learn from you. I think that's an okay thing. I think that can be hospitality.
Yeah, and if you're in the second stage of life saying, hey, I've been through what you've been through. Let me encourage you.
Mm-hmm.
Like your kids aren't crazy like you think they are. They're going to get to the other side. That stuff is really encouraging.
It's really honoring for someone to say, I'd like to get to know you more.
Yeah.
And also I think if our whole church is doing this, it won't be weird to go up to somebody that you've never met at our church, because everyone just heard the same message and the same practice.
We're trying to normalize this.
So if you go up to someone and you say like, hey, I know we haven't spoken, but would you be interested in coming over to my house for lunch? That won't be as weird as it maybe would be had we not done this practice.
Hopefully as leaders, what we're doing is creating permission for people to have those, and it doesn't feel as weird now. The very hard practice is to have dinner with someone who has hurt you and practice reconciliation. We've seen our people do that.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of wisdom that needs to go into this. So
I don't know if I think everyone disagrees. This is the hardest. Did I say disagree?
You said everyone disagrees.
Everyone agrees.
Yeah.
I was going to say nobody disagrees. Everybody agrees.
This is
This is so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a way to do this that's really would be really healthy, a way to do this well, and a way to do this that would be really damaging and confronting. So we are kind of assuming a certain level of emotional maturity, I would say, in this practice. So don't be like, hey, you hurt me, we're going to go duke it out over lunch. But maybe,
hey, casual friend.
Maybe I'm imagining a scenario where there's maybe a friend that you've had and there's been some tension and a weird thing and you know what it's from. I think that what we're doing is sort of breaking the ice and giving you permission to say, hey, I know things have been weird since this thing happened. Why don't we just go talk about this over a meal? Like, that's a lot different, and I think that's doable, and I think that's healthy.
And a lot of times, people have involved us in that situation to help mediate and to help begin that.
Yeah.
I think it'd be wise or mature for people to do it without us having to set it up.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it is necessary. Hey, pastor, here's a situation. I want to find reconciliation. Can you help me? And we'd be happy to help mediate, conduct, create those environments. But yeah, that's a huge struggle for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But like, are we not gospel people? If we're people of reconciliation and love and forgiveness that we so preach, and if we have experienced hospitality God has given us, we can give that hospitality to others. And hospitality is familial love with the stranger, the foreigner, the sinner, those who have hurt you, bringing them back into the fold.
Yeah.
Any other final comments?
Yeah, I think I would just say, you are going to come up across these 4 shadow elements in any community that you're a part of. These are going to happen anywhere you go. And usually these are the reasons that people leave. One, if not more, or all 4 of these. And so what we want to do is we see sharing a meal over a table as the best way. We're trying to encourage people to push through these barriers, these shadow sides that a lot of us are experiencing, even in our own church now, because we've known each other for so long.
Yeah.
And we feel like the best way to do that is over a meal at the table. There are a lot of other ways to do it, but that's why the meal, I think, is so integral for us. Is let's push through this together. Let's systematize it. Let's put it on a schedule, and let's become people who look like Jesus, because of our honoring one another in that way.
I even love Hebrews 13. Like, when you host people over, you're entertaining angels unaware. Like, they're saying there's something deeply significant and spiritual that happens over a table. And so, but yeah, I think the church is built around the table, and I think the enemy wants to divide the church around the table. So I think something heavenly happens when we're at a meal, and something like spiritual warfare happens.
Yeah.
at a meal. So many things are happening. And so it's us intentionally choosing honor, intentionally broadening our circle, not being codependent on one person within our community. It is forgiving each other, not letting resentment build up as we continue to practice, remembering we're on different stages of life and maturity. You have your own thing going. Maybe you're just off. Maybe you have been, but I still forgive you. And it's balancing the ideal and the real. You know, I want us to be visionary people, but I also want us to be realistic people. How do you do that? That's clinging to the person and work of Jesus Christ, wanting what's best for everybody, but also dealing with what was actually in front of us. When we do those things on a constant basis, that can never happen without humility. I think it can never happen without leaning on the grace of Jesus and keeping wisdom, you know, as one of our deepest prayers. Something really, really beautiful can happen. And that's me getting idealistic again, but pushing through it, man, I think is so cool. Some amazing stuff can happen around a table.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for also being a part of the live chat. Joshua, Brenda Jedi Master, as always contributing. Dorian, we will save this on the channel. Appreciate you encouraging us. And yeah, we'll see you guys in next Monday, Lord willing. Right, Caleb?
Yeah.
The camera's on you.
I'll be here.
All right. See you guys.